Welcome to the 16th video in the series, The Character of the Communist Mode Production According to Marx and Engels. Today we'll be going over the 1884 piece by Engels, Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, Chapter 2, The Family, Sections 1, 2, and 4. I skipped over 3 because it did not have anything that was directly of use for the series' needs. I have expressed this in a subtitle, Classless Society Nurtures Human Flourishing, Emancipates Women. Now, I do want to do a quick aside before I start with this. Engels' Origins of the Family and Private Property and State has come under much criticism, some deserved, a lot of it not deserved. I come from an anthropological background myself. I understand some of the problems that are inherent within this sort of thing. But what I will say very clearly is that the primary arguments that Engels is making, that the family form is a transitional thing and is not something that is eternal, holds completely correctly. Even if very particular things about the material organization of family units within different societies and for different periods is its own thing. And I also want to say it is not necessarily correct by the way that Engels puts it, working off of early anthropological research out of Morgan most particularly. By and large, what he has to say here is correct. Now, there are also other things that were quite topical for the time, which did not age particularly well for good reason. And thank goodness that they did not age and are no longer within our viewpoint, most notably around races and the like. But we can work past those things in terms of this series. The last thing is that Engels utilizes the terminology of the time, most notably in order to criticize it. For example, savagery and barbarism and civilization. A large part of what he writes about is effectively saying, hey, listen, actually, these so-called savages, they are more civilized than so-called civilization. Civilization, of course, being defined as European, white society, capitalist society, developed capitalist society most pertinently. So let's get into the summary, and this is where we will also talk about family abolition and what this actually involves and what Marx and Engels are actually arguing for. And you might be surprised about it, but we'll get into that, and if I have any more thoughts along the ways, then I will chip in here. In primitive communism, group marriage was a prevalent form of social arrangement, which did not imply promiscuity, but rather facilitated free and equal partnerships. This mode of relationship arose out of the evolutionary necessity for humans to exist in larger groups, as individual survival in isolation or small units was untenable. As a result, humanity had to transcend jealousy, particularly sexual jealousy, which is often detrimental to group cohesion. This transition was significant for cultural development, as it paved the way for more complex social structures that mitigated feelings of possessiveness. Within this technologically and socially primitive framework, the household operated as a community unit, whose size was contingent upon local conditions. However, the advent of prohibitions against certain sexual relations, such as those involving close kin, namely incest, led to a stratification of social terms and the emergence of multiple households. This laid out the groundwork for new family organizations, such as the Punaluan family, which reflected the communal possession of partners within a defined circle, excluding others. This evolution illustrates how familial forms are dictated by the material conditions of society, adapting to varying social and environmental contexts. As we can see, the family has found itself shifting according to material and culture, which is emergent to material itself, conditions across time and space in different forms, some fundamentally alien and strange to us, and yet just as natural in the minds of those part of those cultures as our own. For instance, the modern monogamous family structure is inherently tied to capitalist modes of production. It did not truly arise before that except within peasantry before the development of capitalism. In this arrangement, individual families function as economic units, emphasizing private property and inheritance, which in turn fosters competition and alienation. Capitalism benefits from families being atomized into these separate units, making them less likely to collectively advocate for shared material interests. The monogamous family sustains patriarchal relations, relegating women to subordinate positions and limiting their economic independence. The capitalist system thus seeks to control the reproductive capabilities of women, using marriage as a means to uphold its economic interests, supporting particular forms of marriage and child rearing, while either repressing legally or socially, or not supporting others. In contrast, the vision of communism dismantles these oppressive structures. In a communist society, love, rather than economic necessity, becomes the basis for relationships. The concept of marriage for love necessitates the abolition of constraints such as property, economic obligations, and the costs associated with entering or exiting a union. True equality among partners, in fact, can only be achieved when individuals are free to leave relationships without economic repercussions. Consequently, all forms of love between consenting adults should be socially validated, moving beyond the limitations of traditional monogamy. Communism being the negation and sublation of all previous societies and arising out of the conditions already in existence, will have a new social reality which is distinct from all previous arrangements and of contemporary monogamous ones. For women to attain true liberation, their labor must be socially recognized and integrated into communal life, rather than confined to the domestic sphere. And this can only be achieved through the means of production being held in common, which will result in domestic labor becoming a collective responsibility. As the monogamous family loses its status as the economic unit, domestic responsibilities, including child rearing and household labor, are communalized. With the dissolution of class society, the significance of familial inheritance diminishes, allowing for a more inclusive approach to child rearing, where all children are regarded as communal responsibilities. And since there is no longer competition between people, others' children are no longer competition to your own. Thus, all children begin to be treated equally. Domestic labor becomes integrated into the broader social production as public duties rather than private obligations, building communities and bringing life to the phrase, quote, "it takes a village to raise a child." And children become communal members rather than extensions of individual families too. Ultimately, by removing the economic rationale behind traditional family structures, individuals become free to form relations based on mutual affection and desire rather than necessity. Some material examples of this include 1. Collective childcare cooperatives, 2. Community kitchens, 3. Household services organized formally which all engage in with a rotation of duties, and for this automation will necessarily become a necessary function, thus bringing domestic labor into the realm of technical development. 4. Public health. 5. Shared household resources and resource pools, and so on. Women must be fully independent from men, able to have access to all society on the level they need for their individual life activity. From each according to their ability to each according to their need is the manifestation of liberation of women, just as it is all of humanity. This is not to quote make quote unquote men obsolete as some believe it to be, but rather to bring women to their full social development as human beings and make love between men and women in its real, full form possible. Economic and social position must be afforded to all regardless of their relations, such that freedom of association becomes reality. The new family relation will result in new forms of education as well, as elucidated in revolutionary pedagogical texts, but far beyond those, since those are based in the modern family organization and must reckon with the needs of capitalist society's production of new labor. In comparison, within a society that engages in collective child rearing and distributes parenting responsibilities among the families, allows children to socially develop far beyond those in constraints of limited individual families. Diverse, enriching learning opportunities become the natural fact due to the wider array of knowledge and perspectives from the community, and social values, cooperation, and empathy become instilled through real-life activity, which produces real necessity for social bonds and interdependence within a large group without competition or individualism, while also giving room for children to seek support from a wide array of adults rather than specific ones. Continuing on in terms of relations between adults, the liberation of love from economic constraints heralds a transformation in societal relationships, as currently people often enter into relationships based on financial security or social status, rather than authentic emotional connection unless the two intersect by chance. Prostitution, which arises from economic necessity, will vanish, and individuals will pursue relationships based solely on genuine affection. In communism, the sale of one's body, whether through marriage or prostitution, or of course through wage labor, will cease to exist, and individuals will no longer feel compelled to enter relationships out of fear of economic insecurity or social obligation, creating a society where love is the sole foundation of interpersonal connections. Men will no longer wield patriarchal privilege, as social norms will shift towards mutual fidelity and respect among partners, because no one is able to compel another to remain in an unwanted relationship through any form of force. The eradication of exploitation fundamentally allows for a more ethical understanding of intimacy, where all interactions are rooted in consent and genuine emotional connection. In this new society, families will no longer face economic barriers to relationships or childbearing, leading to an environment where love can flourish unimpeded by material needs. Open relationships will not only be accepted but encouraged, as are all other forms of relationships between consenting adults, as the economic motivations that once dictated relational choices dissipate. However, it is likely that it will trend towards people selecting singular partners, as loving another fully means giving them time, energy, association at all times, but also all social arrangements will still be supported according to their needs. This reimagined social fabric will produce a new type of individual, liberated from the moral constraints of previous societies, fostering fresh moral and social understandings that align with the principles of equality and communal well-being. These new people, who will never have even heard outside reading of past, quote, barbaric times of sale of flesh, of people entering into relations for any reason but real love and desire for association, will come to completely new social conceptions which we can't imagine in our current social state, just as it is difficult to understand previous societal stages of familial relations. Historical prejudices rooted in patriarchy and class distinctions, such as gender roles, will be eliminated, resulting in absolute freedom of individual expression without economic or social limitation within truly egalitarian relationships based on mutual respect and consent rather than coercion or dominance. With a new social consciousness of recognition of interconnectedness and collective identity, a sense of true belonging that transcends individual families or jealousy emerges, with people seeking out relationships in order to better themselves and their communities. And that is my summary of Engels' Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, Chapter 2, The Family, Sections 1, 2, and 4. And I hope this explains what the abolition of the family means to Marx and Engels. It's not simply, oh, no, everybody's like individuals and no more getting together. Or everybody is in fact married to another, which is a thing in past historical societies. Rather, it is removing the basis of marriage, of the family form, of all these different structures that are necessarily embedded within a patriarchal structure. It is about the emancipation of women from having to be going into relationships. And think especially about the time that Marx and Engels are writing. Women could not own property. They could not hold more than a certain amount of money. They didn't have a whole host of legal recognition. They were, in effect, property of their husband, brother, and father. So, with that said, that is the end of my summary of that. And if you'd like to go over the quotations that I derived this from, as usual, feel free to go into the description below for the shared Google Doc containing this, and potentially enter into the United Marxist Pact Discord server to talk about this more. Tomorrow we'll be going over, in fact, the last piece in this series, the 1890 Engels to Conrad Schmidt in Berlin. Thank you for joining me for today's topical summary, and I hope to see you then.